Good morning, class. I am Ma'am Laika and I will be your teacher in English. So before we start, may I request everyone to please stand up and let's bow our head and ask the presence of the Lord. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, Amen. Amen. So again, good morning, class. Now, please be seated. So make sure that you are on your proper seats because I'm going to check the attendance for today. So no one is absent. Very good. So like what we have discussed before, literature is divided into two forms. And what are those two again? Yes, Miss Lopez. Very good. The two forms of literature are the poetry and the prose. So what is prose? Okay, Miss Matibag. Very well said. So yesterday, we have already started discussing about the first type of prose literature, and that is the short story. So anyone who can tell me what is short story? Okay, Mr. Beron. Very good. So now, we will be having an activity regarding the elements of short story before we proceed to our discussion. Is it fine with you? So now, before we start our interesting lesson for today, we will play a game entitled Pass the Message. So I know every one of you are familiar with this kind of game. Am I right? Alright, so for the mechanics of this game, I will group you into four. Then I will give a short message to the first person in a line, and then they are instructed to pass the message on by whispering it on the ear of the next person in line. The message goes from person to person until it reaches the end of the line. So the last member of the group shall go in front and he or she will tell me the message I gave. So the group who can tell me the message accurately will get a point. So is that clear? Okay, so the first row will be the group 1, the second row will be the group 2, the third row will be the group 3, and the fourth row will be the group 4. So I prepare here a 4 message. So let's start. So class, did you enjoy the activity? Oh, I see it. So our winner is group 2. So let's give them a round of applause. So what have you observed on the message that I gave to you? Anyone? Okay, Miss Sanchez. Very good. And that is what we are going to discuss today. The basic elements of a short story. And we will be guided by our lesson objectives. So at the end of the lesson, the student must be able to, first, demonstrate understanding on the basic elements of a short story. Second, identify the elements of a short story through listening from the given literary piece. And lastly, integrate the elements of short story in making their own literary piece. As what we have discussed yesterday, a short story is a short work of fiction but different from the other types of literature. For example, compared to novels and novelettes, it is quite shorter and has a more specific topic. A short story have 5 elements. Please enumerate what are those 5, Mr. Antonio. Okay, correct. So now, we are going to tackle them all one by one. Let us begin with the character. So based on what you have listened from your group mates a while ago, who can define what is character? Yes, Miss Flores. Very good. So character in a short story is a person. In some stories, an animal who takes part in the action of the story or other literary work. So we can say that the characters are the movers in the story. It is said that the heart of the story are the characters. The two most important characters in the short story are the protagonist and the antagonist. So let's differentiate the two. So the protagonist is considered as the main character or most important of all the characters. Some depicts the protagonist as the hero of the story. On the other hand, the antagonist is the enemy of the protagonist. He is the character that challenges the main character. So in this story Snow White, I know some of you are familiar with this story. So can someone tell me who the protagonist and the antagonist are? Yes, Miss De Castro. Okay, correct. So now, let's move on to the next elements, the setting. So who can remember what is the setting based on our activity a while ago? Yes, Mr. Besas. Thank you. So basically, a setting is a description of where and when the story takes place. So listen carefully. So a setting does not literally mean the exact place or exact time. It can be a season, like for example, one summer in the province of Mindoro, or scenery like near the bay as they watch the sunset. So those are the examples of setting. Is that clear? Okay, so Miss Reyes, can you please give me an example of a setting? Alright, very good. So now, we will move to the next element, which is the plot. So anyone who wants to read? Go ahead, Mr. Denzel. Thank you. So the plot is the framework of the story. It also refers to the sequence of events in a story. Usually, it is done through the story map. So the following are the different parts of story structure: the exposition, the rising action, climax, falling action, and lastly, the resolution. So let's go deeper on each one. So what is an exposition? Any idea? Yes, Miss Cosme. Very well said. So an exposition is the beginning of the story. This is where the author introduces the characters, identifies the story is happening, and establishes the main conflict. So next is we have the rising action. This event occurs as you begin to move throughout the story. This is also where the conflicts started to build. So now, let's move on to the next parts of the plot, which is the climax. So it is the most exciting part of the short story. This is the part in the story when important decisions are made or important things are discovered. So is that clear? Alright, so the fourth part is the falling action. It occurs right after the climax. It is when the main problem of the story starts to work themselves out. And the last one is the resolution. It is the end of the story where the main problem is being resolved. So, okay, now that we are done on the different parts of the plot, so do you have any questions or clarifications regarding on that elements? Anyone? Okay, since you don't have any questions, we will move on to the another element, which is the conflict. So anyone who can remember what is conflict based on what you heard from our activity, pass the message. Yes, Miss Asi. So without conflict, the story will not be very interesting to the readers. Every story needs to have a problem, and this problem is called a conflict. So there are 4 types of conflict. The first one is the man versus man. And who can explain it to the class? Anyone? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Teves. Very good. So man versus man is the conflict between the characters of the story. For example, the protagonist versus the antagonist. So okay, next is the man versus the society. So this means that the conflict is between the man and the beliefs, laws, norms, and standards within the society. And the third one is Man versus nature. This is when there are calamities or natural phenomena that the character is facing. And the last one is man versus himself. This is when the main character struggles with his own soul, ideas of what is right and what is wrong, and choices in life. So, do you understand the different types of conflict? And the fifth element is the theme. The theme is the central idea in a short story. It is the main point of the whole story. So for example, in the story The Gift of Magic, what is the theme of the story? Anyone? Yes, Miss Perez. Very good. So now that we are done, do you have any questions about the 5 elements or any clarifications? Do you understand? Okay, great. Since we are done on our discussion, we will have another activity. But before that, let's have a recap. So what are the 5 elements of the short story again? Yes, Mr. De Leon. Correct. The 5 elements of the short story are the setting, characters, plot, conflict, and the theme. So how about the 2 kinds of characters? Anyone? Yes, Mr. Lopez. Very good. So they are the protagonist and the antagonist. So now, Ms. Hernandez, can you please give the 4 types of conflict? Great. The 4 types of conflicts are the man versus man versus society, man versus nature, and man versus himself. It seems that you really understand the lesson for today. So, do you have any more questions? So now, we will listen to an audiobook about the story entitled The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. It is a graded recitation, so please listen carefully on the important information and details because it will help you in identifying what elements of the short story being used or can be found from the given example or audio. I will play the video only one. Therefore, you must listen carefully. So, are you ready? Okay, let us listen on this audio.
The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Narrated by Dale Thomas. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. It was her sister Josephine who told her, in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half-concealing. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aquiver with the new spring life. The delicious breath of rain was in the air. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly, and countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. There were patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above the other in the west, facing her window. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continues to sob in its dreams. She was young, with a fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it, fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name, but she felt it, creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will, as powerless as her two white slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under her breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and grey and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. And she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. There would be no one to live for her during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. And yet she had loved him, sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? Free, body and soul free, she kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. Louise, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door. Go away. I am not making myself ill. No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her. Spring days and summer days, and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. She arose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. Someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. It was Brentley Mallard who entered, a little travel-stained, composedly carrying his gripsack and an umbrella. He had been far from the scene of the accident, and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. But Richard's was too late. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of the joy that kills.
So, did you understand? That is good. And now, who can give me the elements of the story presented in the video? Who are the characters? Yes, Miss Chavez. Correct. There are 4 characters in the story of Ann R, including Brentley Mallard, Lois Mallard, Josephine, and Richard. So what else? Yes, Mr. Perez. Precisely. The story happens in the house of Mallard, mostly in Lois' room. And this story was also set in the 19th century. So another is, what is the theme of the story? Any idea? Who have an idea? Okay, yes, Miss Ordanza. Very good. So love and marriage are also some of the themes in the story. Additionally, one of the clearest themes found in the story of An Hour is also the theme of freedom. So as we can notice on the video, once Lois found out that his husband died because of an accident, she begins to realize that she has a freedom to live for her own life. You can see the moment that this realization hits as she whispers, "Free, free, free." So now, what is the conflict? Okay, Miss Hernandez. Very good. So the conflict in the story happens between Mrs. Mallard and herself and the conflict with a society. So it seems that you really understand the story, that you've listened. Good job, everyone. So now, I think everyone is already prepared for a very short quiz. Am I right? Alright, so now for your quiz, I need your 2 ears again because I will read a summary of the story entitled Dead Star. And then after that, you will answer the questions that are flashed on the screen. Write your answers on the 1/4 sheet of paper. I will also read the short story once. Therefore, you must listen carefully. So do I make myself clear? Okay, now I will read the story, so please listen. Dead Stars by Paz Marquez Benitez. The short story revolves around one man, Alfredo Salazar, and the affairs of his heart. He is a man who believes in true love and hopes to find bliss in its way. The first woman he falls in love with is Esperanza. Their families are acquainted with each other and they begin a passionate relationship. But soon, it fades away when Alfredo comes across another woman, Julia, who becomes the object of his desire. Esperanza and Alfredo have their engagement after 3 years of romance. Alfredo, a lawyer, is a man who wants warmth and compassion, but Esperanza is a strong-willed and passionate and woman of principles. So when he comes at Judge Del Valle's house, he meets Julia Salas, sister-in-law of Judge, who is a friend of Alfredo's father. He is strongly attracted to her. Julia is an enthusiastic and optimistic person, a woman of hope, dreams, and desires. On his visit with his father, he starts engaging in profound chats with Julia and starts getting attracted to her charm, wit, and passion. In his impassioned state, he does not even disclose the truth about his engagement to Esperanza. In order to avoid the scrutiny of his fiancée, he starts keeping secret from Esperanza too. One day, he learns about Julia's return to her hometown. His eyes are doomed with the fear of losing her, and he decides to confess his guilt and true feelings to Julia. After the procession of the Lady of Sorrows, Alfredo goes to meet Julia, even though his fiancée is waiting for him to come her. However, reaching to Julia, he realized that Julia has already learned about his lies. Despite of what he did, Julia even wishes him best on his marriage to Esperanza and leaves him. He gets a double blow when he returns home to Esperanza. She is talking to a friend about loyalty and faithfulness. Alfredo feels an urge to speak. He defends the cause of desire and choice over immorality. This under the skin of Esperanza, who declares that she knew about him and Julia. She encourages him to commit such immoral infidelity and cancel the wedding, all in pursuit of his heart's content and lust. However, Alfredo surrenders to reason and sanity, and the wedding goes ahead as planned. After 8 years, as fate would have it, he is sent on some work duty to a place near to Julia's hometown. He cannot help resist the feeling of longing and old desire for Julia. He finds an excuse and ways to meet and see Julia. She is still single, and he is forced to dream about a life with her instead of Esperanza. But soon, he comes to know that something is not the same after all. Julia has changed and rather lost something now. Maybe it is her beauty, wit, charm, or even her passion. But she is a different woman. She is cold and unfriendly and does not extend the same warmth and affection to him anymore. He is heartbroken and pensive and questions whether he ever loved her truly. Was it all a useful infatuation or mere affair? Was the romance they shared just a figment of his imagination? Whatever it was, he is no more alive. He accepts the hard reality that anything that there may have been was there no more. So these were the questions for your quiz. For question number 1, who is the author of the story Dead Star? A. Paz Marquez Benitez, B. William Shakespeare, C. Nick Joaquin, and D. Francisco Arceliana. Number 2. Who is the main character in the story? A. Esperanza, B. Julia, C. Alfredo, and D. Juan. Number 3. Who is the wife of Alfredo who showed exquisite beauty? A. Julia, B. Esperanza, C. Juliet, D. Elizabeth. Number 4. What is the profession of Alfredo Salazar? A. Doctor, B. Engineer, C. Professor, or D. Lawyer. Number 5. At whose place did Alfredo and Julia meet? A. Don Julian's house, B. Judge Del Valle's house, C. Church, D. Restaurant. Number 6. How many years have passed after Julia and Alfredo met again? A. 5 years, B. 6 years, C. 7 years, or D. 8 years. Number 7. After meeting again, it is clear in the eyes of Julia that she still has feelings for Alfredo. A. True, B. False, C. Maybe, D. I don't know. For number 8. Among the following, what is the main theme of the story? A. Forbidden love, B. Contentment, C. Rejection, or D. Dishonest. Number 9. Alfredo was torn between two women, Esperanza and Julia Salas. What type of conflict that these represent? A. Man versus man, B. Man versus self, C. Man versus nature, or D. Man versus society. And lastly, which of the following words does not describe the characteristics of Alfredo? A. Romantic, B. Loving, C. Faithful, or D. Hardworking. So are you done? Okay, let's check your answer. So exchange your paper with your seatmates. So what is the answer for number 1? Yes, Miss Perez. Very good. Okay, number 2. Who wants to answer? Yes, Mr. Flores. Correct. Okay, Miss Reyes, please answer that next question. Alright, precisely. So next. Yes, Mr. Beron. Very good. So for the number 5, Miss Delen, please answer. Next. Yes, Miss Garcia. Correct. So who wants to answer? Yes, Miss Torres. Alright, correct. So, the last number, who wants to answer? Yes, Miss Hernandez. Very good. So, for the number 9, Mr. Lopez, please answer the question. Precisely. And for the last number, okay, Mr. Sanchez. Correct. So, who got the perfect score? Very good. Okay, class. Your assignment is to write a short story about the love story of your parents. So, you're going to interview and listen to them first in order to write a great short story with an engaging plot. In writing your assignment, you need to consider the elements of a short story. So please be guided using the following rubrics presented on the screen. So do you have any clarifications? Alright, if that's the case, then goodbye class. See you on our next meeting.